What's up, gangsters? It's time for a classic Rube Goldberg episode. Classic because this is going to involve everything that the whole idea of Rube Goldberg Enterprises sometimes seems to embody. I fucked up. Not so much in what I did with the project itself, but in the premature statement to someone that this had been a fairly drama-free project and that I hadn't made any major mistakes. Yeah, never say that until after you've taken your final photographs. The project in question is my Accurate Miniatures B-25B Mitchell version 2.0 that, of course, I am building as a commission piece. Yeah. Let me just show you what happened here. You're going to love this. This will make you laugh. Okay, so here we go. Here is the Mitchell. And you're probably saying, what could possibly be wrong? That looks fine. Yeah, well... Oops. What in the actual fuck? Are you kidding me right now? I know you have to be laughing, because this is such a schoolboy mistake, except that I didn't really make a mistake. I did all the right things. I have what I thought was plenty of weight in front of the main gear on this thing. Now, you know with a Mitchell, you don't have a whole lot of space up there in the nose. And in this particular case, what you have is a little bit of room right here next to the landing gear on the right-hand side. I'm going to just try and adjust the camera rather than move the model around any more than I have to. Anyway, so it's right here, okay? Basically, from right here back to right here, you have a sort of a quarter cylindrical cavity that runs the length of that you can stuff weight into. Now the Accurate Miniatures version comes with little brass plates, and when I did it, I also added some steel nuts in the front of the engine nacelles, and I did the same thing here. So what I've got in this one, because Academy doesn't give you any weight in the kit, is this section here is filled with lead shot. And then I basically just ran some super glue in there, and so it's a pretty solid chunk of lead, basically. But for reasons that I just can't even figure out, obviously the thing is a tail sitter. And look, this is baffling my master's degree in mechanical engineering brain, because my first one is fine, and the density of brass is less than the density of lead. And I just can't figure it out. And I tested this. I sort of stuck the wings on there loosely and sort of stuck the landing gear in there loosely and tested it with the amount of weight that I had on it, and it rocked forward on the nose, just like it should. But for whatever reason, this is a total fail. There's a slight difference in the position of the landing gear or something from when it was dry fit. And basically, yeah, I have a major problem. The problem in large part is that there just is not enough room inside here to put much weight. And this is a problem with all Mitchell kits. The only other volume that's empty in there, and it's kind of pointless now because it's so basically impossible to get to, is the Bombardier's tunnel that runs from right here back to about that red line as well. And that's about a 1/4 inch square by whatever that length is, 1.5 inches, 1.25 inches. And that's a pretty nice little volume that if it was filled with lead as well as the other space, it might be enough. But the only way to get to that volume now is through the open crew hatch underneath. And that's a pretty sketchy proposal. Because the last thing I want to do is try to dump something in there and have it fall all the way into the nose where it obviously is going to show. So unless I can figure out a way to poke something in there to plug that tunnel up, and then put something in there on top of it, and then put another plug in there to keep it from falling back out, and whatever glue or whatever is associated with all of that, not running into the nose and screwing up my clear. Anyway, you get the idea. That's just not, that's just not going to work well. So here I have to figure out what to do, obviously, and it seems pretty much like the only space available is again in the engine nacelles. But that's a pretty short moment of inertia. That's a fancy engineering way of saying leverage. Basically, the longer the lever is from the center of pivot, the less force you need. That seems pretty much obvious to everybody, right? Anybody who's ever played on a seesaw knows that. So if I put something inside here, it's going to have to be heavier than if I could put it up here. Exactly how much is that? Well, I've been experimenting, and if I drop the nose down and grab this big steel washer and these two lead lag screw weights, you can see that is just barely enough right there over the cockpit. But if I move it back to about the front of the nacelles, now it's definitely not enough. In fact, I have to take and stack another chunk of lead on there, and it's still not quite enough. So, that just barely gets it done, and that's about in line with the rear of the engines. If I scoot it forward to just about where the engines are, then that's plenty of weight. So, the question is how to get that much volume of mass inside this thing without conducting some kind of major surgery and totally jacking up all of my hard work that I've got like 150 hours and 10 calendar months of effort into. So let's do some engineering. All right, let me get this business out of the way, and we'll proceed. Since I'm picking it up, there is the aforementioned crew hatch door. And you can see barely, if you look right in there, where that tunnel is. It's not an easy thing to get to. It's much easier to think about dumping something in through the landing gear door in the nacelles. Or possibly, this is another idea that occurred to me at about 4 a.m. the other morning, dumping something into the front of the engine housings, because there's some room around the engines and behind the engines. If only I had some type of very heavy powder that I could put in there. Well, as it happens, I do, because I have done an emergency eBay purchase of this stuff right here. This is tungsten powder, and it's from a golf supply, and this small amount, believe it or not, is half a pound. 8 ounces right there, high density tungsten powder. Now, you might immediately be going, wait a minute, the density or the molecular weight of tungsten is less than the molecular weight of lead, and you'd be right. If you look on the periodic table, let's just do that. Okay, here we go. You just have to love smartphones and the internet. Okay, so if you look, you can see that lead is 82 on the periodic table. There it is, PB. And tungsten is W, 74 on the periodic table. And you're like, why the heck is tungsten a W? Well, it's because the ore that tungsten is retrieved from is called wolframite. So that's just traditionally always been how it's denoted on the periodic table. Anyway, let's look at the relative densities of these two materials, however. Okay, there we go. Density of lead, 11.34 grams per centimeter cubed. And look at that, density of tungsten, 19.3 grams per centimeter cubed. It's about 1.7 times as dense. And you're like, wait a minute, how in the heck can that happen if the atomic number of tungsten is lower than the atomic number of lead? Well, it just comes down to atomic structure, molecular structure. The fact is that the atoms of a tungsten molecule are packed in much tighter because of their shape and their arrangement than they are in lead. And so what you end up with is a much higher density. So tungsten to the rescue. And also the fact that it's a powder that will very easily pour. If you, let's see, well, you can just see it, how it flows inside this container. So what I think is that if I put it into a bottle that's got a pour spout, formerly my water bottle, that I will be able to basically just pour this stuff into whatever cavity I need to, and then come along with some extra thin CA glue and glue it all together. But one concern I have is that cyanoacrylate produces an exothermic reaction when it cures. What does exothermic mean? Well, that means it gives off heat. And some of you guys know this. You've experienced cyanoacrylate getting all smoky as it's curing, and there are horror stories of it getting hot enough to actually soften plastic, and obviously the last thing I want to do is melt anything. So let's just do a quick experiment here. I've got a little bit of this tungsten powder. Let's just dump some glue on it and see what happens. It is not getting all smoky, and it's turned pretty much instantly into a solid mass. Now, my sensation on my fingers is not very good, but I don't feel anything like excess heat. It's not melting the cup. So I think we're on to something. All right, so I'm gonna throw that away. And let's get on to the business of figuring out how much weight to put in the damn thing. When I purchased the tungsten powder, and it really wasn't very expensive, and I think this is a good solution for a lot of these type situations where you need nose weight. When I purchased it, I think it was like maybe 13 bucks or something. It really wasn't too bad. I also bought this tiny little battery-powered kitchen scale for about the same amount of money. And if I pile this garbage on here, looks like I have 1.384 ounces of material there. So how much is that going to be in tungsten powder? The first thing I need to do is put a cup on there and tear the scale. So that zeroes it out. And now I need to figure out how to get some tungsten powder out of there. And hey, look, I actually found a good use for one of these stupid plastic spoons at my workbench that I'm always bitching about as being silly for paint tests. So here we go. It isn't going to take a whole lot of tungsten powder. Okay, that's almost half an ounce. Well, the pile's getting bigger than I thought. There's 1 ounce. 1.326. This is not looking good, guys. So there we go. 1.6. Holy shit. This is completely baffling to me that I need this much material to solve this problem. I can't figure it out. I don't understand, because this stuff right here, these are the little lead pieces of lead shot that I used. The only thing that I can figure is that because of the empty space, and I mean in fancy engineering terms it's called interstitial spaces between the balls, that I actually don't have a very dense pack of material in that nose section. I mean, that right there, that's 0.2 ounces of lead shot. I mean, I'm baffled that it didn't work. I'm also baffled that I need that much of the tungsten powder. So the challenge is going to be how to get all of that tungsten powder packed into the space available. And I'm going to go off and think about that for a little while. Okay, so here's what I'm going to try to do. This is either going to be a very good, great success, or a massive disaster. And yeah, probably not the smartest thing I've ever attempted to do on camera, but at any rate, I think I'm going to go for dumping some inside the engines right here. Actually, yeah, no, I'm not going to do that at all. They're just not. I just don't think that there's a lot of advantage to that. Maybe. Let's try. Let's see. This is what happens when I'm in problem-solving mode, is sometimes it's just trial and error. And this is not really the kind of thing that I like to be doing, trial and error. But sometimes fortune favors the bold. I've experimented and found that this stuff will pour out of this little bottle, but not easily, as I'm finding out. I have exactly the amount of powder that I need inside the bottle. So hopefully I'll get the right amount in there however I do it. The problem is I can't really tell if it's actually pouring out right now or not. I can't really see in there well enough to tell. I'm not too worried about it getting dirty in there, because that's a dirty area anyway. I don't think visually I'm gonna screw anything up, but I honestly can't tell how much, if any, powder I'm getting in there. There's some, I think you can see. Kind of hard to tell, but there's definitely some going in there. And so I'm going to just continue doing this until I feel like I've got a significant amount of it inside there. And then I'll dump some glue into it. But I already don't like the way this is going. Okay, well, I'm having another holy shit moment because I just set the thing down, as you can see, and it, well, mostly stayed on its nose. I guess that was more because of the, it was catching the front wheel on that paper towel than anything else. But I feel like I'm closer. You can see, if you've been watching, that I've had trouble getting the damn tungsten powder to stay inside there. I've drained quite a bit of super glue into the thing, and every time I turn it over or shake it, I still get tungsten powder falling out, and that's been the main issue so far. Is I've managed to get quite a bit of the powder in there, but just keeping it in there. And you can see that my precision method of putting the powder in there was a total fail for the most part. It just does not come out of that bottle easily enough to make that work very well. And so at one point I just got this little cup and just dumped a whole bunch in there. And that went really well because the powder easily falls to the lowest spot. But it did not work well enough. The problem was that once I got it in there, it didn't stay put, even though I dumped what I thought was a massive amount of super glue in there. And that's been scary enough, because what you can't really see very well is that even though I correctly predicted that all of this structure around the engine nacelles was pretty well sealed up, I did get some super glue seeping out into the joints, and you can see it if you look at the right angle. You can kind of see, but at least I did not get a massive blob of it running out and screwing everything up. The only real casualties so far are that I've got some super glue around where I was dumping it in there, and that'll be fairly easy to take care of. I did get, oh shit, I spoke too soon. Fuck. I've got super glue running back out of this landing gear. You can see I got a big blob of it, and fuck, there's some on the front of the engine. So this is always the thing that's a potential issue when you start dumping super glue into something, is that it's going to come running out of places that you did not expect it to. and that obviously can be a major disaster. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to immediately squirt some kicker in there, because I've got I can't have that. I mean, I've already got a little bit of super glue on the front of the engine nacelle there. That's already hardened up. I mean, so far it's a pain in the ass, but it's not a disaster. But I do have to solve that problem. I can't. Obviously, I cannot have super glue running out all over the place. So I'm gonna do that and see where I'm at. Well, here we go. It's a couple hours and a lunch break later, and I just thought I would let you guys see the ugly aftermath of all of this. Yeah, this just got ugly. But as you can see, the front wheel is planted firmly on solid ground, and it's about as well weighted on the nose as I think I'd want. I'm not sure exactly how much material I ended up getting in there, but you can see it was a difficult process, because what would happen is I would dump it in, put some super glue, and then I got where I was just drizzling a little bit of kicker in there from an eyedropper to try and solidify things as quickly as possible. And then I would shake it to let any powder that was still loose fall back out, and then I would repeat that process. And as you can see, it took a few tries. And this stuff is just messy as shit. I've got it on the floor, I've got it on my trousers, but hey, ultimately this is all better than what the consequences would have been otherwise. So I'll live with it. What's up, gangsters? So here's a quick late night addendum to all that drama. During the process of adding the landing gear doors and the bomb bay doors, all of the flipping and rolling that I had to do to be able to complete that work, caused even more of my tungsten powder to come raining out of one of the engine nacelles. And I felt like I needed to compensate for that. But obviously, at that point, with the gear doors in place, a lot more difficult to get material in there. And I felt like I needed to be more precise. So I decided to try an experiment of making a slurry of tungsten powder and future. Now, could I have used something else? Somebody suggested thinned PVA glue. Yeah, I probably could have used that, but I would have had to thin it. Future, already perfectly thin. So I went for that. And what I was hoping to accomplish was to be able to make a slurry that I could squirt into the landing gear opening with a pipette. And so what I found was that it works, but with one really critical caveat. What happens with this tungsten powder, because it's so heavy, is that almost as soon as you stop stirring, it begins to settle. And it basically turns into fudge, which obviously is not going to go through a pipette. If you keep it moving, then you can keep the particles in suspension, and it will actually, you can draw it up in a pipette and you can squirt it out, but you have to do it quickly. Like stir, 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 suck, squirt. That's about all the time you have. Wow, that sounds like something that would happen in porn. Anyway, it works, and it'll settle just fine. This is the leftover, and you can see that it has pretty well hardened into a lump of tungsten and future. So it was relatively easy to solve my problem that way, and I wish I had done that experiment before I went through all of the mess that you guys witnessed, because I could have put all of the weight that I needed to in there much easier and with much less of a drama. Anyway, so there you go. Okay, well, there we go. That, thank goodness, is over with, and the problem is solved. That was super ugly, but hey, I guess all's well that ends well. I learned some things. I think I probably got off pretty lightly, all things considered. I had to do one small paint touch-up and a few spots of dull coat touch-up, obviously, and I had to deal with some of those little super glue goobers, but you know, a little bit of careful work with a sanding stick and some a little airbrushing. Not too much of a penalty, honestly. But it was highly stressful while I was in the middle of it, as these things always are. I think what I would do differently next time is I would probably be a little bit more disciplined about putting in small amounts of the tungsten powder, dropping in a little bit of glue, dropping in a little bit of kicker, and then just continue to do that. But I just kept trying to be greedy and dump a bunch of the powder in, and then when it was all said and done, I'd end up dumping a bunch of it back out because it didn't soak the super glue in quite as quickly or as well as I had hoped it would. One thing that occurred to me while I was doing it that I didn't want to experiment with is that I might try pigment fixer, because pigment fixer, although it's basically just enamel, clear varnish, and mineral spirits, does provide a lightweight kind of glue for pigments. And hey, this tungsten powder is basically just a very heavy pigment, and we know that pigment fixer soaks in really well, so that might have worked better. It just wouldn't have been as quick. You know, you would have had to let it sit there for 4 hours while it dried out. So, you know, as always with these things, it's a trade-off, and you just kind of got to work your way through it. But what would be really cool is if I could figure out a way to mix up some sort of a material like epoxy or something that I could stir the tungsten powder into and create really dense, shapeable little pellets. But I don't know. I haven't thought of a material that would allow me to do that very easily. That's basically what things like Abe's epoxy sculpting putty are, just with a different kind of metal powder in it. I think it probably has aluminum in it. So, you know, it's possible, but for now, I'm just happy that that little drama is over with, and I can do the final assembly and put this thing in the shipping crate and get it off of my workbench. Anyway, I hope you found that entertaining. I hope somebody did, and maybe even a little bit useful. So anyway, as always, I definitely appreciate you watching. Much love.